for people to log in. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's Gala webinar. My name is Isabella Massardo and I'm content strategist here at Gala. So today we're going to talk about large tech and indigenous community. And you see the moderator, Ludmila Golovine, and her guests are already on screen, ready to start. We're going to just give it one more minute just to make sure that everybody is logged in. In the meantime, if you feel like it, you can write in the chat where you are joining us from and whether you speak any indigenous languages. We are curious.
Or if you're working on any indigenous languages.
Oh, if you're working, yes. Okay, so we have someone joining in from Ethiopia.
Wow.
Wonderful. Silicon Valley. And then, of course, Priscilla was working on Taíno. Did I pronounce it correctly?
That's correct. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Wonderful. Okay, let's get started. Mayan languages, of course, for Mila. Let's get started. Just to remind you briefly, the webinar is being recorded. I will publish the recording on the Gala website as soon as possible, and you will receive an email with the link to the recording. Feel free to ask any questions either in the chat box or in the QA box. There's going to be time at the end of the conversation for some questions from the audience. So I'm going to be backstage, and if you have any technical issues, you can send me a message through the chat box and I will help you troubleshoot. So for now, enjoy the conversation. Mila, over to you.
Well, thank you everyone for joining. And it's a very important topic that we're going to be discussing today, bridging the digital divide for the millions of people who are left behind it in a way, or the people who are wanting and interested in joining the digital world. And of course, all of this comes with many challenges that many of us are familiar with, such as for communities not knowing where to start, for large tech companies, how do you build collaboration with communities, low digital literacy, sometimes not even a documented alphabet, or alphabet is not available. So a variety of very many challenges. However, the underlying issue is the technology. And that's what we're going to focus on today. We have an incredible panel. We have Cornelius with Google, who's been an advocate for indigenous languages and has accomplished many, many things, but among them is building digital tools for languages like Cherokee and Fulani. We have Stephen Loomis, who is the chair of CLDR, Digitally Disadvantaged Languages Working Group, and he'll discuss his work with Unicode and many indigenous and marginalized language communities. And we have Priscilla Colón, who has undertaken an incredible challenge of revitalizing a dead language that has been pronounced dead 200 years ago, and she'll tell us all about this, and she's the founder of Casa Areyto. So my first question is to all of the panelists, can you share a story or an experience that highlights the challenges of bringing an indigenous language into a digital space? And Craig, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Mila, and I'm so happy to be here. I'm privileged to be working with the Cherokee Nation. I met them by accident, or I met a member of the Cherokee Nation by accident about 12, 13 years ago. And he connected me with the Cherokee Nation back in Oklahoma. The Cherokee Nation had done the hard work of actually taking their writing system and getting it into standards so that Unicode was well understood and was being used by the Cherokee folks. One of the challenges that we faced when we started working with getting Cherokee into Google systems and into the hands of people on their cell phones was that the big vendors of phones didn't think that Cherokee was important enough to include. They would routinely, for example, strip out a font that displays the Cherokee characters. And for those of you who aren't familiar with it, even if you have a standardized writing system and it is in your phone, if you don't have a font to actually shape the characters on your screen, whether it's on your desktop or your mobile device, you can't see those characters. They show up as little white boxes, commonly called tofu, in the internationalization realm. And the Cherokee Nation got the support of Google in the sense of getting the font into the phones, but the carriers at this time, the phone carriers, the phone manufacturers stripped it out. They said, no, who's going to use this? It's not important. And they saved a few kilobytes in their phones by stripping out the Cherokee font. I visited the Cherokee Nation and met with the then Secretary of State for the Cherokee Nation, who is now the principal chief of the Cherokees. He and I consulted, and he actually went to the phone companies and used the power of their organization, the Cherokee Nation, to get the phone companies and the phone vendors to actually include this. So that was a big step forward, a challenge that you wouldn't expect, but it was a block to the folks using it.
Amazing, amazing. Stephen, from the Unicode perspective and from your work perspective, what's one of the challenges that you can highlight?
Well, I think one of the challenges that I see is making people aware that there are paths to their language being used more prevalently, and there are even ways to type in their language and to access content. I was in the country of Malta. I lived there for a year, but prior to living there, I just observed that people would be typing and they would see red squiggles in their word processor, and then they would just backspace and they'd retype. And it was because they were using hacked fonts rather than using Unicode text support. And so one of the challenges I had was even just letting people know that you could use Unicode text. You didn't have to use a font-based solution. But I think that there are a lot of interesting technical challenges, but many of the challenges we face are just connecting with the right people, the groups, the speakers of the indigenous language, having a forum and a place for their language to thrive, and connecting to those speakers. So those are some of the things I face.
Amazing. And Priscilla, you have both experience, working in the localization industry at one point in your career, and you were the speaker of what sounds like an oxymoron. You're a speaker of a dead language, but tell us about your challenge. And then, yes.
So it's so funny, as I was listening to Stephen, I have a couple of challenges, one of which is very similar to what Stephen mentioned, but I'll start with one of the more basic challenges. I am a learner, a teacher, and a speaker of a language considered extinct. It was declared extinct about a couple hundred years ago, and then my people were declared extinct about 500 years ago, so I don't exist. So it's the Taíno language. It's the first language of contact with Europeans from 1492 on that fateful day. In 2023, we held the very first International Language Conference. I was able to communicate then with UNESCO's International Decade of Indigenous Languages, and we became partners. And they said, this is a great accomplishment. We'll partner with you. So as part of our partnership, I'm able to upload all of our Taíno resources to the official site of the IDIL. Wonderful. I went in, Taíno doesn't exist on their list. So the very first challenge I faced was there was no Taíno in the dropdown for me to be able to upload my resources because as an extinct language, as it was labeled as such, it wasn't pulled in from the World Atlas lists of languages. So it took a few months to be able to communicate back and forth, ask them to update their lists. A few months later, it was updated. So that's one very basic challenge that a language like mine finds. Another one is, it speaks to what Stephen talked about, was that as someone who's working in localization, I understand things such as every character has a Unicode value. That must be registered and approved in order for you to type in your language. I was working with a linguist who was actually the one who is credited with creating the first modern variant of Taíno. He had hired someone to create a keyboard with a new script, except they didn't understand that they had to actually register the new script with Unicode. So they basically created a font skin on the Latin letters. When I was working with him to try to integrate that into the software that I'm using to create the first digital course, it became very obvious what had happened. But of course, as a linguist, it wasn't his job to know that that was so. Most people type in their phones and, they don't understand what's happening behind the scenes. So I had to educate him, and we worked around with the company that we're using the technology for. We did a workaround to use available Unicode characters to be able to display it within the current system that we're using, but that's just a temporary fix. So I second what Stephen said about that gap existing between those folks who are trying to do the work, who are passionate about doing the work, but maybe they don't have all of the technical background to do it in a way that is sustainable, right? And the companies. And this isn't the only time I've encountered this. Literally a couple of weeks ago, another community member said, "Oh, we're going to create a keyboard with a different script." And then she said, "It's asking me for a U+ code." And I go, "Yes, those are Unicodes." So again, bridging that gap is really important. And I would love to kind of delve into how we do that during this conversation. But those are a couple of the challenges that I've faced.
And for a community, it is completely daunting and overwhelming because you happen to speak English, but many communities may only speak their language, especially communities that have large linguistic groups that only speak their language. And we've been working with the Mayan community. And again, Mayan is one of the main, Quiche or Kekchi may be a main language that somebody speaks. So the task may be daunting. So Craig, you work and actually brought to the digital world Cherokee and Fulani languages. You also work with Fulani languages. Can you tell us more about your experience and how the digital tools became available and what difference did it make?
Of course. Thank you. I wanted to mention the chance encounter that I had. I literally met this man named, his last name is Black Fox. I asked him about his name. He said it was his tribal name. And he asked me what I did. And I said I did languages at Google. And then he made the connection. I think the first thing is curiosity and openness to finding out about people, because it's people's interests that are going to make things happen. Once I got connected with the Cherokee linguist back in Oklahoma, we tried to figure out what to do. The first thing that they had that pointed out to me is that they had done the hard work of getting the Cherokee writing system into Unicode, which they subsequently changed by adding a whole set of lowercase elements in a few years later. But the important point was that they had done the hard work of standardization. Now getting it into systems was the tricky part. We started simple and we said, well, what if we took the Google user interface and just translated that into the Cherokee language? And we did. With their support, I was able to get the Cherokee characters into the Google user interface. There is a Cherokee interface now for Google user interface. And that was a good starting point. It got very exciting when we introduced, or when the Chrome browser started being used with this. And the Chrome browser internally used a code CHR indicating Chrome. But CHR is also the code for the Cherokee writing system and the Cherokee language. So when we first introduced the Cherokee UI in Google, all of a sudden everyone across the world using Chrome browsers would start seeing Cherokee characters on their devices. Why? Because Chrome developers had assumed CHR was not a valid language code and were using it internally. The Cherokee folks were delighted by this. The internet was confused for a few days. The next step was to work on a keyboard for the mobile devices because Android was pretty new at that point. And I worked with the Gboard team to get a Cherokee version. And the Cherokees had already worked out ways of encoding or of entering their characters. They have 85 characters uppercase and 85 lowercase. So it wasn't just a matter of replacing the characters on a regular QWERTY keyboard with the Cherokee letters. They invented a way of doing that with 2 taps for each character. And their innovation really made it possible for us to quickly implement that into Gboard, and it's also available on iPhone. So that work was done with the Cherokees and using their ideas. And then my job was mostly to make sure that teams at Google and other companies understood that this was available. And then the implementation into the devices was the slow part. It takes time to roll out releases. A few years after this experience with the Cherokee folks, I read an article in the Atlantic magazine about 2 brothers who invented a writing system for the language called Pular, or also Fulfulde or Fulani is the name of the people in Africa. And it mentioned, just like the man Sequoyah of the Cherokee Nation 200 years ago, these brothers had invented a writing system for their language. I said, I got to talk to them through the Unicode people. I got in contact with these brothers. They, again, had done the hard work of getting the initial Unicode standardization started. And my job, again, was to let Google people know in various groups that this was important. So the Google Fonts people had already gotten started. The Gboard people got started on it. And pretty quickly, we were able to get it into Android. And that Android release in late 2017 was so exciting that the brothers actually took a bunch of Android phones to Africa for the first, or for an ADLUM conference in their home country of Guinea, and they invited me to go there and be part of that. I gave a talk at their ADLUM conference, and there were hundreds of people there. And when I walked into the room, people started chanting, Google, Google, Google. It was a little overwhelming, but it was an indication of how excited these people were to be able to start using their language on modern devices. And now the Pular language in the ADLAM writing system, which is very natural for their language, very phonetic, and very easy for them to learn, is spreading widely across the internet, social media, YouTube, and direct communications, chat, email. All the modern things are available because we got the keyboards and the fonts, and the people who were going to use it were involved in all these steps, and they have propagated this information to many, many people in Africa and the diaspora of this group. It's very exciting.
Incredible. Really incredible. Stephen, from your perspective, what are the biggest technical challenges in designing tools for digitally disadvantaged language? And if you can also go and tell us how has the CLDR keyboard specifications involved in supporting smaller languages? And of course, feel free to share some of your war stories, because you mentioned amazing communities that you've worked with.
Yes, certainly. So what are some of the technical challenges? Well, it's interesting, and I think I want to highlight how important standards are in this space. It's important that people can do experiments and try things out and have that freedom, but the underlying substrate of standards is just absolutely critical. Unicode has been so successful that most people don't even know how it enables the major modern languages today. And so people don't experience the sorts of things that were experienced in past years as far as character encoding goes. I would say that 2024 was the year that language codes broke for me. Priscilla, that's sort of what you were referring to as far as not finding my language there. It was just this convergence of things and remembering code I'd written a long time ago, thinking this will never. It was sort of like the CHR issue Craig mentioned, thinking no one will ever use this for any linguistic purpose. Some code regret. But so I would say some of the issues I see are first one is language codes. The Banyamulenge people in the Democratic Republic of the Congo speak a language that's officially classified as mutually intelligible with Rwandan. However, it's actually very distinct, and there's no code in the locale code space to distinguish those. And so, as with the Taíno language, there'd be no way to upload. It's the exact same issue. So language codes is one thing I see, and dialects, categorizing dialects is part of that. The other thing I see is just as from implementation perspective, is data. We're starting to hear in concern from implementations that there's too many languages. It's too much data. And so I think there's major shifts in how the industry deals with languages to be able to keep minority languages from being left out. So those are some of a couple of the technical issues I'm dealing with. Keyboards. So keyboard has been an interesting thing. I've been the editor of the keyboard standard. That's also part of Unicode's CLDR. And basically, the current story is that someone has to talk to someone from, let's say, Google, like Craig, but you also have to go talk to Apple about iPhone and Mac. You have to go up north in the United States to Microsoft. You have to talk to the Linux community. So there's all these disparate doors you have to knock on in order to get keyboards. There's one door for characters, that's Unicode, and that's great. But there's lots of doors for keyboards. And so the CLDR locale standard solves that by having a single standard that can be deployed on all platforms. It's not supported by those platforms yet. So this is still a work in progress, but we have some promising steps on that area.
Well, that's incredible, and standards are important. And again, coming back about all of the places and doors you have to knock on is again can be incredibly overwhelming, especially if a community doesn't have digital literacy. Mm-hmm. And I have heard, like, yes, there are too many languages. So, but Priscilla, tell us about your story. Why your language? Why after 200 years of the language being dead, why did you take that on? And then let us know, how are you leveraging the digital tools today to bring your language back, or did it ever go away?
Oh, thank you. Yes. So just to set the scene, Taíno is what we know today as that language that was first encountered by Europeans in 1492. So it was the first Indigenous American language, and it quickly spread around the world. So all of you here today speak Taíno, and you may not realize it. So words such as hurricane and hammock, manatee, guava. I mean, I could go on and on and on. Maize, canoe, those are all Taíno words. And they were quickly borrowed and integrated into Spanish, French, English. And now these words are used in Japan and Iran. I mean, there's practically no language that doesn't have Taíno integrated in it. So I think the work that is going on with Taíno should interest all of us because it does affect all of us. We each share a little bit of it. Obviously, as an extinct language, as a language declared extinct, we're working from the bottom. So when I hear stories such as the one that you mentioned, Craig, about trying to get, the Google interface completely translated into Cherokee, I'm like, you're light years ahead. That's where we want to be, right? I would say if we truly believe that every language is important and every language has a unique perspective and shows the world in a completely different way, we should all be interested in affording every language the opportunity to survive for future generations. I'll share a little bit about what that means to me as a descendant and my community. We have been disconnected from our language for hundreds of years. But when I talk to community members about learning basic words such as hello or many blessings, or even just to say mother or father in that language, they say that it literally resonates in their body, that they can feel healing happening, that they can feel that connection with the ancestors that have long ago been declared extinct. When I personally work with this language, I feel like I'm the voice of my ancestors. I'm doing the work that they couldn't do so that, their voices are heard today. So yes, there's this technical part of it that I work with, but there's a deeper meaning to the work that I do that is deeply personal and spiritual, and it's rooted in that ancestry that had long ago been declared extinct. That's a little bit about the work that I do. Now, I'd love to pull on a couple of things that I heard both Craig and Steve mention. So things such as language codes. So I'm going to assume that the people listening don't actually know what that is, because most of the people that I speak to have no clue what a language code is. So each language is given a code, usually a 3-letter code. And there is a code for Taíno, it's TNQ. And then usually that code also comes with a little country code, a little abbreviation that tells you in which country it's spoken in. So the official one for Taíno is TNQ-PR for Puerto Rico. But you could have Taíno spoken in the Dominican Republic and Haiti and so on, and you could have many different dialects or variants. So then the code might change a little bit to show in which country, or maybe that it's a specific dialect that is spoken. And that has to be standard. So that's a standardized thing, and each language is afforded a code. So that's the first thing. And then from there, then we get to Unicodes. Every character has to be assigned a specific code so that it becomes typable. And by character, I mean every letter, every accent mark, every combination of characters, numbers, and so on. Now, the reason I understand this is because I worked in localization. I worked at a company that had more than 180 different languages. I helped bring some of these languages that up until recently, their alphabets were at debate. I've helped to bring them to the digital world. We had to show linguists who really their work had been just to do translation. I had to show them how to create keyboards within our systems, how to make sure that every single character was accounted for. Now, I happen to know this because that's what I was trained in professionally. Most communities, well, I would say most people around the world have no clue how that happens. So we need to start kind of bringing back the conversation to the very basic information. So how do we get that information to folks? Stephen, you talked about having that CLDR, a commonly, deployed platform, a commonly deployed keyboard so that folks can put in their information and then it could be deployed to different platforms. That's one way to do it. Many folks in the communities are passionate about this. If you give them a self-serve platform, they will find the way to do it. But then it's bridging that gap, right? The other thing you mentioned was now you have to go knocking on every door because every single tech company has a different process, right? So you have Apple and Google and the Microsofts and Linuxes of the world, right? I did a little knock it around when I was trying to get trying to see where could I get Taíno, I ended up going to my Microsoft account manager and saying, hey, so do you guys work on Indigenous languages? And who are the people? And can we just try to get Taíno on a list somewhere? They can contact me. I don't know where that went. So knocking on doors is really hard. Where do we go, right? And Craig, when you were talking about helping, bring the Cherokee to life and then Fulani, my first question was like, are you the person? Are there more of you out there who we can work with to try to get this done? Because we do have a community that's interested in working on this. So I guess just to kind of summarize what I said, this work is important, not just because of the digital part. There are people's lives invested in this work. It will go, it's fundamental to reconnecting to who we are as a people, to advancing as a people, right? It's work that if we want to move humanity forward, we need to start coming together, even if it's just through making languages available to human beings. But there is a big gap where we are in the technology world and where the communities are. And I see us being able to work together to bridge that gap, but we really need to start thinking of innovative ways of doing it, like the CLDR, like there are other projects. Amila, please correct me. It was like the open language project that other folks are talking about.
There is the big gap between the work. There's a lot of work done by the Indigenous communities, but there's almost like a communication gap because people don't know where to go, where to ask. And Priscilla, you're bringing up open language. This is a great point. This is an example of the Sami people where they've built all of their tools, but they're not able to connect them to the large tech solutions because their language is not considered economically viable because of the how few speakers. And I want to ask a question because both Craig and Stephen, you work in the kind of within the realm of the large tech. A language is incredibly important, like Priscilla just said, to the heart of the people. And then on the other side is the question, what is the economic use case justification? And us working right now with the Mayan languages, we actually did through a set of accidental steps, maybe found the right person at Microsoft, hopefully, but we're now looking at the form that says provide economic justification. So Craig, you work at Google. How do communities do that?
You're right. Economic justification is often used as a barrier to adding language support. I think one needs to talk about multiple levels of language support. We've talked about basic characters and fonts. I'd start back with the communities, even if the character system isn't standardized, even if the fonts aren't available publicly, for people to start using their language in the community, maybe even with handwritten signs, even with hacked fonts on their local computers. Getting into the community and getting an organization within the community is critical. There's an example of a community, the Sunawar community in eastern Nepal and part of India called Sikkim. They have the Sunawar Welfare Society. They pushed hard to A, get their language used, B, get it into the Unicode standard, and now they are working with various organizations to get the Sunawar language supported in various ways. Support means a lot of things. The basics is getting your characters and a way of typing it into a system. Fortunately, we have tools that are publicly available now and without cost that people can develop their own keyboards. Keyman is a publicly available tool. Anyone who has a Windows machine can develop a keyboard with that. A critical part of that is getting young people in the community who are adept with the technology of cell phones and computers, get them involved with the language support organization within the community. those are the people who will figure out, oh, how do I connect my phone? How do I hook up a keyboard that I've just created? How do I actually install a font on my local computer? Those aspects of getting the community involved, and especially the young people who are more tech savvy on the average than us older folks, I think is very, very important to get started. With the Unicode standard, one big barrier is someone has to say, oh, this writing system, which is not yet standardized, is actually being used in the community, and provide evidence for that. School books, signage, posters, all sorts of things within the community that can be shown as actual use of the writing system is a powerful argument for getting standardization. It doesn't happen overnight, but once it's standardized, then things can move forward. Getting the community using it, even if it isn't perfect, is absolutely the right thing to do.
Thank you, Craig. One of the questions that comes up, and I've heard it in different contexts, including voiced by the Maori people at the Permanent Forum for Indigenous Issues, is the question of data ownership.
Mm-hmm.
Stephen, and some communities feel like, you know, they want to hold all of their data. Some communities feel that large tech comes in and maybe, quote unquote, steals their data. And some communities would love to find a place to keep their data, to host their data. So there is community opinions about data on all of the different spectrums. But what opportunities, Stephen, exist for communities to both have their data hosted when working with large tech platforms, and maintain ownership in terms of, because sometimes when large tech companies take ownership, what comes out is solutions that were developed without the feedback of the community. So they you know, the language doesn't sound right at the end. Anyway, Stephen, would love to hear your perspective on this.
Yeah, and I think what was said about language being part of the heart, you know, it's connected to the heart, it's connected to the history, is so important. I mean, sometimes my challenge personally is I work with literally all languages, and so they can sometimes they can seem like just additional codes, but the reality is that language is how you communicate from the heart. And I think as far as data ownership, there's a few different pieces. How data is owned is certainly a very hot topic these days, with big data and AI and the like. But I think one of the things I come to in thinking about standards, open technology, and try to communicate is that when you have a data set that is available for use, whether that's something such as the CLDR, which is under an open source license, what that does is it means that data can then be picked up and used in technology, by different platforms and companies. And so having the licensure, and I've surprisingly actually done a lot with licensure, having the licensure story sorted out, having data sovereignty, having these questions answered, taking the time to discuss the implications of contributing data to a certain project, let's say. Though it might seem like an unnecessary overhead, this is just the legal fine print, or it's something the lawyers talk about. But it actually means that data can then be used and picked up. So when the Cherokee data is in CLDR, now you have Cherokee on all devices, not just at Google, but at every device around the world now has this data available. And I think as far as hosting, there are a number of different projects. Unicode is working on some projects that have data hosting. I know there are projects for things such as sound data. I've seen, basically, I think there are people that are hosting some of these different data sets out there. In the Pacific Northwest in North America, the First Peoples Cultural Council hosts a number of data for Indigenous communities in that region. And they also provide clear guidance on who owns this data. There's data sets that are private and public. So they allow, for example, a community to have recordings of their, let's say, tribal leaders. They might have private recordings of them that are not made public to the world, but they may have other data sets that are public. So I don't have a single answer for that, but I think these are important questions to ask, and it's important to that a community knows what will happen with their data once they submit it, that they know who will have access to this data, and also they will know what the benefit is. If you have Taíno data out there in the world, what is the benefit? Where does that go? And how does that then benefit the end users?
Priscilla, you're kind of like the bridging the divide between the Indigenous people and large tech. So what do you think is the best solution? How do we build trust with the Indigenous communities, and how does the technology companies, we obviously see examples of Google and Unicode and other large tech that want to collaborate. What do you think the solution is to this?
Yeah, so I'd love to piggyback on what Stephen just talked about. I think in the end, the choice always has to be with the Indigenous community. They have to understand the implications of working with a specific company, how the data is going to be used, if other folks can use it. So I work with a, excuse me, a wonderful organization called 7,000 Languages, and they facilitate the preservation and revitalization of Indigenous languages through courses that uses digital technology. It is the only one I've found so far, and I did my digging, my research, that helps us do this, develop full courses completely for free. They are nonprofit, and they receive the digital software as a donation from Transparent Language. So they not only teach you how to use the software, so they're teaching you to create the content, then you can go in and create whatever content you want, everything from starting with a basic alphabet to inputting your script if you have a specialized script, to using Latin script if that's what you prefer, to creating your lessons, importing content, recording, and all of that. They also allow you to then export it completely and use it somewhere else if that's what you wish. So you don't have to use it through the platform. You can also use it in another platform. And so I'm working with them to create the very first digital course for the Taíno language, and they allow me that flexibility. They also recommend other nonprofits that maybe are working specifically in developing dictionaries or corpora, and they facilitate that movement of content from the platform over to those other folks. So having the ability to have the choice of what to do with my content that I'm developing. The other one is some tribal partners decide that the content is only going to be available to their communities. They have the ability to partition it and have private access versus a course like mine, where my goal is to make it completely publicly available, because the way that I see it is our language was taken from us, 500 or so years ago. If I don't make it publicly available, then I'm limiting who can actually see it. As a people who live all over the world, Taíno descendants are everywhere. There's not one country where we aren't. I would be limiting myself, and I'm limiting the ability for other folks to learn if I don't make my content publicly available. I understand the implications of that. That means that if it's publicly available, it can be scraped by folks, by AI. But you know what? I really want that because I want, 500 years from now, Taíno to be as, publicly available as English would be. I want movies to be in Taíno. I want street signs and books all over the place to be in Taíno. But that's a choice that I'm making with my content. I'm not saying that's the right choice for everyone and in every context. And so that's my take on data ownership. I would say I'd love to answer the question you talked about, what are financial benefits, right, to companies? So I've done the math. There are about 17 million Taíno descendants in the US alone. 17 million. I mean, that's just counting Puerto Rico and the possible descendants living in the continental US. So if we're talking about financial benefits, I bet if we threw out like a Taíno-based movie tomorrow, it would break the box office. Everyone would go to watch it. So the benefits are there for the companies. It's just making them aware that this exists, right? That there are people out there who are yearning for this information. And I did like your tip, Craig, when you talked about showing that people are using the language, showing that the interest is there so that it motivates big tech to, take a leap of faith.
That's amazing. A language that is really alive, right? Really alive, and how unaware we are, about it. So my next question is, what are the practical steps? We have this divide between the communities don't know where to go, the communities don't know how to find the information, and then the tech companies, and many of the communities think that because of that, there are technical challenges. Some of the technical challenges are very real, and again, the open language proposal by the Sami people gives the solution, or one of the possible solutions to address this. How do we bridge that dialogue? How do we become findable in a way? How do we stop being a mystery? Besides accidentally meeting somebody, I don't know. Craig, what would be your suggestion, maybe? And that's my question to all of you.
Well, the first thing is start with the people who are actually using the technology, the young people. I have an example. A friend of mine and a man I work with, Stephen Morey, is a professor of linguistics, recently retired from a university in Melbourne. He worked for many years with the communities, documenting language as a linguist and learning the language and making friends in those communities. He wrote a lot of documents using coded fonts to support his documentation efforts and writing these languages. He's now turning those into Unicode with my help. And he's going back and visiting those communities and working with the young people in those communities and showing them how to use those keyboards. And once the young person knows how to use that keyboard that has been developed by a tech company or by someone individually, then the young people start showing the elders and the community use explodes. So helping young people to identify that, yes, your language can be supported. It doesn't have to have full machine translation support for your language to be usable on the internet, is one of the first things for people to start using it in social media, and texting is a critical thing. How do you let the young people know what's going on? Encourage education. I work with a group called the Endangered Languages Project that touches on another area called language revitalization. That community isn't focused on technology so much, but it's focused on getting people to use their languages and revitalize them. Once a language community has decided that it wants to use this language in the future, then connecting them with the technology and getting the young people involved is a critical step. It isn't everything, but it's a starting point.
Okay.
It can.
Thank you, Stephen. What what is your take on this?
Yeah, one thing I would say, and actually we've just the last couple of weeks in the DDL, CLDR DDL, we've been discussing the topic of organizations, and that is, okay, you have individual people who might be, say, here I am, here's my language. I'm using Taíno as example, but I would say it's very valuable to have some sort of an organization or a structure. I'll give you an example. The Chuvash language that's spoken in a region in Russia. There was a very dedicated person who contributed. I didn't count it, but it's thousands and thousands of data items in the Chuvash language. However, we didn't have a way to validate who the person is. They were basically coming as a guest. But they were able to connect us with a Chuvash Institute that's sponsored by the Chuvashia regional government. Okay, so now with a Chuvash Institute, there's people with a PhD in Chuvash language that can validate this content. Now that makes it a lot easier to know and validate and to then propagate that data. So I would say maybe not everyone has an institute of that language, but at least there can be some structure. Can you put together a working group? Can you talk to the elder, the community leader, and have some sort of a structure that says this is an institution with maybe it's maybe very informal, but something that is something that shows that you can speak for the language more than just a personal opinion. I think that's something that can be beneficial, thinking from the side of big tech and trying to scale, adding additional languages coming in. So anyway, that's something I've been thinking of recently, and as we're trying to develop some guidelines around this. And let's say if there's a linguistics department, or there's someone teaching this course that you mentioned, the course in Taíno that you're working on and considering. Okay, if there's a course, there's somebody working on that I think can be very beneficial. And of course, that's especially critical for the language in actual use by its people.
And we have very interesting questions to actually each and every one of you in the chat. But before I go to the questions, Priscilla, how do you see bridging that divide from your perspective?
Yeah, and all of what you mentioned, Stephen and Craig, it's great for those people who have established languages. It's great for those people who are even who have been around, enough so that they're federally recognized or even just recognized as a group. It puts people on the other end of the spectrum, such as Taíno descendants, at a disadvantage, right? So we have, for example, the Taíno Naiki variant, which is the variant that I am learning and teaching. We have two of us, the creator and me. And I'm the only teacher available. I'm the only one creating content for this in the world. So it puts us at a very disadvantage. Of course, it does mean that we do have to get together as a community, and we are doing so slowly but surely. What I see as something that would be beneficial is there is a lot of information out there. For example, translation commons. I was talking to Mila the other day, and she pointed out the what is it, the zero to digital, the zero to digital guide. I didn't know that existed. There is that. There are ways to digitize your language, but because the information is everywhere, and because the information is different, if you're trying to get something on Google versus Microsoft versus Apple, I see there being a huge benefit for big tech to team up with folks from the International Decade of Indigenous Languages. So I'm I'm a co-chair of Ad Hoc Group 1, which is in charge of education and educational domains. Of course, that touches digital technology, but Ad Hoc Group 4 is specifically focused on digital technology. I can see there being a huge benefit if Microsoft, Google, Apple, and so on get in touch and work collaboratively with Ad Hoc Group 4. There may be solutions that can be implemented. For example, a self-serve, somewhere where you go in and you say, got my Unicode, or, even if you go in and you say, does your language have a special script? Did you go to Unicode already? Nope, go here, right? It's just like a self-serve type thing. And then, oh, now you have your language is standardized through Unicode. Great. Do you want to put it into Microsoft? Do you want to create a keyboard? It should be a self-serve sort of platform. One, this means it's minimizing the time and the costs for the individual companies, because you're not having to find, for example, a Craig at every company to hand walk you through the process. I was talking to a colleague. He said, that there are 1,500 different languages in India, indigenous languages. In the US, we have about 500 between federally recognized and unrecognized tribes, and Taíno isn't even counted. So let's start multiplying that. If we needed a Craig or a Stephen for every single language and dialect available, we'd never be able to work on this. But if we unite as big tech, work with IDIL and Ad Hoc Group 4 to start streamlining some of these processes, it's going to help the companies in the end. It's going to help the people who want to get their languages into technology as well. And because we have so many people who are passionate about doing it. So I think that's a major thing we're going to have to start working toward. And I would be happy to put both of you and anyone else who wants to in contact with my colleagues at the International Decade.
That would be amazing. That would be amazing. And I see many conversations continuing. I don't want to ignore the questions. So we have Mesret Ale Mayahu, professor and translator and founder of RDLS Ethiopia, a language and data company in Ethiopia. And if we have a couple of minutes, so Priscilla, the first question for you. So they're preparing to train youth in creating digital content. How do you evaluate the success? And what key matrix would you recommend? And given that we only have a couple of minutes left, Craig and Stephen, if you can look in the comments, if you can give a quick answer. So Priscilla?
I would say start with your objectives. So if you're trying to train them on digital technology, is it the fact that you just want them to learn XYZ in a specific technology? If you're working toward creating content, how many pieces of content do you want to create, and what is the goal of that content? For example, I'm working on creating a beginner to intermediate course in Taíno. So I've measured out, I need a full year-long course. These are the expectations for this course. At the end of this course, what do I want people to achieve? And then after that, take it step by step. It might be just training them first on what a country code is, what a what a language code is, and then moving step by step. And it's baby steps, but you can get there. And MasterWord, thank you so much. We have actually been working on some of the work for the International Decade. So I really appreciate that question for being here.
Fred, the questions are, what strategies or partnerships would you recommend?
It depends on the goals. If the language is already being used widely and it's healthy, then I would focus on things like education, developing a standardized version of the language in terms of spelling and so on, and developing content online, making sure that there is a way of typing it and using it widely, and then it will get noticed by large language vendors. I also want to point out that it isn't necessary to get Google or Microsoft or Apple or other big company to do something with your language if you're already using it on social media. To get the attention of these companies is useful, but it's not necessary to actually be texting and emailing each other in the language.
Well, thank you. And MasterWord, if you actually put in the chat your email or the way to contact you, we'll make sure of giving you more expanded answers. But Stephen, the question to you is, given the high cost of developing digital tools, what open source platforms or cost-effective solutions would you recommend for languages in Africa?
Well, I know there's a community called Masakane that seems to have a thriving discussions back and forth about digital tools in Africa. I would say also get involved with Unicode, CLDR, and ICU. I can say, for example, in Ethiopia, we would like to support the the Ethiopian time cycle, which has a unique way of telling the time of day in the world, and that's one that's been on my plate. But there are items like that in the Unicode space that can be discussed. Make use of GitHub. Look for tools that look for open source content that can be leveraged, that can be contributed back to. Be out there in the community. That would be my recommendation. You can write me directly too.
Yes, thank you very much. And for those wondering if we can get if you're getting the recording, yes, the recording will be available through Gala. So for Gala members and for a small fee for non-members. So the recording will be available. And thank you for our amazing panelists for this very incredible discussion. We can go on for many hours, but now is the time. Back to Isabel.
Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone. It was a very interesting conversation, but it's not the end because we have our annual conference coming up in April in Montreal, 13th to 15th of April, where the conversation will continue. Mila will present her Mayan language project, and we'll also have other speakers, for example, talking about using AI for Aboriginal languages in emergency cases in mining sites in Australia. So lots to talk about. If you feel like it, join us in Montreal. And for now, thank you, everybody. Thank you to all attendees, and hope to see you soon at another Gala event. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.